Hello and welcome to Scrapbooking Station. In this video, it's a quick card, and I was inspired from a webisode on Paper Wishes that talked about finishes for different papers. So I've got some specialty material cardstock in my stash. So I go step by step through their design, and then I've got tons of other samples to share. So I can put the camera over my shoulder and we get started. This is the grading I'm going to demonstrate in this video. So it's going to have the same design elements, and I'm going to have 3 different finishes, only I want to do it in silver and navy. So my finishes are going to be a brushed silver, and then a mirror silver or foiled silver, and then a sparkling silver. Now I'm going to have issues with these materials flashing back at the camera, and so I'm going to leave these in little segments. So let me break off and bring in the pieces that we're going to need and tools. To start off with, I'm going to work with these panels, and so I know the relationship between the brushed and the foiled is about 2/3, 1/3. And so my embossing folder is going to give me limitations on the length. So I know I can get about 5 7/8 of an embossed panel through here without having creases where I try and do more than one piece. So I made it 5 7/8. And this is 3 inches because that's going to be my 2/3 portion. And as we move into looking at the other samples, it's got to be something that's going to show striking, or it's going to be good looking once it's dry embossed. And so I know I'm going to have an edge, just the tiniest of edges on the top and the bottom that are not going to be dry embossed. And so I'm going to move this, since on the right side of the card, off just a little bit off the embossed area so that I've got a tiny little edge on this side. Now when I bring in my brush gold, that's going to be 1.5 inches, so that's going to be 1/3 of my panel. And I'm going to move it kind of the same way, but on the right side, leaving just the tiniest of edge that's not embossed. So let me do that. While I'm over there dry embossing, I might as well be cutting out, because I know I'm going to need 3 mats for my butterflies and my sentiment. And so this is going to be the mat on my card base, but you're only going to see the tiniest little edge on that, and so I'm just going to use this piece of cardstock. I guess you could consider it gutting, but I'm going to make my shadows, or my mats for my butterflies, so I'm going to cut 3 of these out of here, and also my sentiment. This time I'm just going to use Smile to change things up, so instead of thanks on this image. So let me get things cut out and we'll start assembling. Okay, at this point, what I've also done is taken my 2 panels and put them side by side, leaving about a 1/16 of an inch border with my mat card. So you can see that's where I cut out all the pieces. So that's all put together. The other thing I want to do is, since I'm using a textile ribbon, I don't want it moving up and down and showing kind of the edge here. And so I have backed it with a piece of cardstock. And so now I've got my sticky strip. And so when I attach it, I want to do it now before I put it on my card base, because I'm going to wrap this back behind that image. And so I'm just going to stick this down. And then I'm going to be pulling up my tape and wrapping this under. And this is where you can't see the edges of my ribbon, so it's going to be something like that. So once that I get that together, I'm going to put it on my card base, and this base card is 5 by 6.5. So that's going to give me about a 1/4 inch on all sides. And so I'm going to have that put together and add all my other elements. On the Smile, I decided to make it look like it was coated cardstock. And so all I've done is clear emboss the sentiment after I die cut it. So I'll get that all put together and I'll be back with the finished piece. So first, let me apologize about the out of focus. Really not a lot I can do with working all the specialty materials. So place my butterflies, and actually everything on here is really flat, even though this card looks incredibly dimensional. So kind of put together. I just want to compare it to the black one, black and gold, because this one's actually kind of much more casual, even though there's a lot of specialty materials, and this one's much more formal. So those are the 2. On the inside, I got plenty to choose from, because I got all these specialty materials. I chose to add just the die cut and the plain cardstock with the brushed silver behind the stamped greeting. So of course, if I'm going to use embossing folders, I'm going to try to emboss the flap of the envelope. And so in this case, the embossing folder really wasn't big enough, but since I'm not using a special material, it's easier to hide where the two embossed pieces come together. So came across this way with the embossing folder and then caught that last little bit on second pass. I did want to talk about these materials and tools, and so what I've got is a lot of Stampin' Up. So I've got my Night of Navy with the ink and the cardstock, and the brushed silver also comes from Stampin' Up. This silver is not Mary, this is Crate & Craft mirror cardstock, and then the glitter piece I used was actually a base card from Paper Wishes. On the tool side, the embossing folder comes from Paper Wishes, as does this butterfly set of dies, and the smile I bought off of eBay, and the greeting comes from Floral Greetings. Okay, let me move this out of the way. We're going to talk about my next project. In the second project, we're going to change things up a little bit, so I've got some different materials, and I want to talk about the dies, because this is a very specialized little die set. It's not often that you have like this filigree die cut with its own mat, and so actually I can count the number I have like on one hand. So let's use something different. This is actually a set of different sized die cuts, and so there is a filigree image, but it's intended to go exactly onto its base. And so if I were to layer these up, this would be exactly on top of here. So what I'm going to do is take the middle one and use the piece for the larger mat and create my elements that way across the card. I'm also going to use a texture plate to add dots to my specialty stock. And this time, instead of a brushed, I'm going to use what they call pearlescent cardstock. So that's got a really pretty finish. Let's go this way with it. I'm going to use a satin board. And these both come, actually all three of these materials come from Crate & Craft, so they call this satin board for my foil substitute. And this, I think they call it sparkle cardstock. So I got three colors, and I'm going to pair it up with sugar plum, so that's going to be my base. And here's how the second one turned out. So I went ahead and put it all together exactly the same way. So put my panels onto the mat, and then added the ribbon, and then added the whole kind of top to the card base, and then added my focal elements. So really pretty. I think the kind of monochromatic really works well for this card design, and of course your specialty materials really make it something special. So I did do 5 pieces, and on these middle ones just kind of used the plain cardstock, so a plain white, and then this filigree portion here. Assembled exactly the same way. This is a larger card because I was able to create larger or longer panels. So this is 5 by 7. So the widths remain consistent, 2/3, 1/3, and then added a sentiment. And all these die cuts on here I have purchased off of eBay. So the reason I use a dot is actually this is a card blank from Hunky Dory, and I just turned it inside out so I had the dots on the inside. Again, more die cuts and kind of those samples, just kind of smattered them all over the place. Okay, I want to move right into the next one because we're going to change materials and change dies again. So I've got another texture plate, and specialty materials is on my list of stuff to do for masculine cards, but it's a nice way to dress up a card for a guy. And so what I've got here is some Miri. It's Miri Dark, and so it's kind of an ombre. And so for my panel, I'm going to choose a piece that changes color. So somewhere mostly blue and then moving down. Of course, here's my texture plate. I'm going to go with suede because suede is another great material that shows texture really well. And then my glitter card is going to be this white from Stampin' Up. And when you have white, you have any color. So I'm just going to use a Sharpie marker, a blue Sharpie marker, and make it blue. And those are going to be my 3 specialties. Now this time, instead of using kind of a matte and then filigree, I'm just going to offset using a single die. So this is going to be Dad. Father's Day is coming up. And so I've got 2. One out of the specialty and then one with a offset of the same letter. I finished it, so let's take a look. And let me see if I'm in. Okay, let me turn it this way so you don't see too much glare. But really pretty. So again, using my marker to change white to that, but I think between the pattern that shows up on your specialty and then having kind of a non-pattern piece really is enough of a contrast, so you don't have to worry about that whole matte and layered die cut. And this way you can use any die cut for this card. So again, really pretty. On the inside, this is actually a piece of adorable scoreable, so I used again the kind of the pretty portion for the interior of my card and just a couple more die cuts. So material wise, this is a Hunky Dory Miri cardstock. This comes from Paper Wishes, this suede, and then the sparkle is Stampin' Up, and the letters are large letters from Stampin' Up as well. Okay, I've got 2 more samples to show, so let me get this out of the way and we'll keep going. Okay, this was a fun one to create, so I'm really pushing the contrast between the embossed and the plain. The other thing is this is a smallish embossing folder, so I'm back to using that. It doesn't mean it has to be a smallish card. Just add larger borders. The other thing, which I didn't think about, is why not use a textured cardstock for your base card. So this is a hammered cardstock. And then lastly, kind of promoting the whole thing, if I've got a specialty material, it's going to be white. And so all I've got here is a coated cardstock that's actually office supply, which I use for card bases a lot, so it's about 160 pound card weight. Then I've got some pearlescent white from Create and Craft, and then this one's actually got a checkerboard. So I die cut that. I've got some suede on here. Of course, I've got ribbon, and I've got a mesh, and I've got Mary done in that white sparkle from Stampin' Up. So the embossing folder is a busy snowflake that comes from Paper Wishes, and then my tree comes from Paper Wishes also, but it's D's Distinctively. And my little birdhouse is part of a set from Hunky Dory. On the inside, I just stamped with gray, so I've got that going. But again, kind of this, just made this focal smaller. I've got quite a wide edge on here, and so this card is 7 by 4.5. So these are thinner. I've got about 2 inches on this panel and 1 inch and maybe 1/8 for this panel. So again, using a small embossing folder for your larger card. And then the envelope. Okay, lastly, the stamp set I used on the inside comes from Stampin' Up. It's White Christmas. Okay, I've got one last project to show, and this is really interesting because what I'm finding that I am limited by the foil, because it's really hard to create a foil look without a foiled cardstock. And so I had this piece of like this light green or lime green that comes from Paper Wishes, and I'm just going to make my own specialty paper. And I thought about showing burnishing with either flocks or the glitter onto a sticky surface, but I've got an easier way to go about doing that, so we're going to make our own specialty paper. So I'm going to start with some Certainly Celery base card, and I've got Certainly Celery ink. And so for my soft or suede-like panel, what I did was use toilet paper, and if you haven't seen the whole embossing with toilet paper, that's what this is, and it creates a nice soft texture. The other thing I used was some glitter dust. So I took my base card and I embossed it first. Let's bring in the finished project. So I embossed it first, and then I sprayed glitter dust on it. And then for one of my elements, I also sprayed glitter dust on just plain cardstock, and so I get my sparkle cardstock. And of course, here's that foil element. And then for this last piece, it's not specialty at all, it's just a pattern of Certainly Celery. Of course, my ribbon, and I clear embossed over my sentiment and plain cardstock, and that gives me the look of coated. And on the inside, just a little element with a sentiment. The die for this is a Toto die, so it comes from Create and Craft. Anyway, so whether you make your own glittery paper, you use plain white. I think if you keep it somewhat monochromatic, you're going to like the look, but it's a lot of fun to bring your special materials into the forefront, because typically what we're doing is relegating it to just little accents or behind your focals. So anyway, I hope you took something with you you can use in your own card making, and I thank you for watching.